So, if you're following along, this is the fourth video, and we are still in the adoptive parent questionnaire that they're going to be completing on their own and handing to you. And we are in the case scenario question. We are in the second international adoption case scenario question. And this one says, upon arrival home, your child is binging on food during meals and making themselves sick. You also find stashes of food in his or her closet and underneath his or her bed. What do you feel is the root causes of this behavior? How do you address the root cause of the behavior? How do you teach your child healthy eating habits and help incorporate them? If you're newer to the adoption field and you haven't had a situation where a child is binging on food or hoarding food or hiding food, we do see it frequently. It's one of the reasons in the post-placement questionnaire that we ask about the child's eating habits. Eating habits can go hand in hand very much with grieving, and so we see the majority of eating habits right when the child comes home and is still going through that grieving stage. A lot of times that grief will come out and exemplify itself through eating habits. So the first question in this case scenario is, what do you feel is the root cause of this behavior? So we want the family to know that the root cause of this behavior is primarily grief, but it could also have something to do with the child not just knowing how to have healthy eating habits, especially if they've adopted a child from a poor third world nation country. That child might have never had an experience where they have food readily available to them at all times. They might have come from a country where they went hungry a lot of times, where they had to fight for food. So being in a home where they have plenty of food available to them 24/7 can be overwhelming for children, and they might just not know how to control their urge to obtain this food. So we've worked with several of our families on this, and there's a lot of good habits that the family can help the child form, and there's a lot of practices and means available to the family to help the child establish good habits. Of course, they're going to want to address the root cause of the behavior, which is grieving, if it is that. And a lot of times that subsides after the first several weeks or months. But it can go on further, and so the child might need to see a counselor to discuss some of the grief that they're going through, especially if these behaviors are continuing over a long period of time. Now, if it's the kind of case where this child is just not used to having food available to them and they are just gorging themselves and hiding food under their bed because they're afraid that they don't know when their next meal is going to come because that's the lifestyle they're used to, then there's a lot of practices the family can put into place to help with that, such as having either a snack jar or a snack basket. That's something we've instituted in our house where Silas, we have a snack basket on our kitchen table, and it is full of healthy snacks for him, whether it be a granola bar or let's see, popcorn. He loves popcorn. And he knows that he can go to the snack basket anytime, and he can get a snack from there at any time. That helps him, one, know that food is readily available for him all the time. It also helps him be able to help himself to food, and not depend on mom or dad to have to get him food every 5 minutes that he's hungry. And it's also, like I said, it's healthy snacks. So it's the parent choosing what snacks that they want to put in there. We don't want them to be filling it with candy. We want it to be healthy snacks so that the child can get full without being nutritionally unhealthy. Another thing that it can help with gorging themselves, especially if they're doing this at the dinner table, is not necessarily to serve food family style where you have, a bowl of baked beans, a bowl of corn, all the meat there on the table, but you load your child's plate for them in the kitchen at the stove, and then you bring the full plate to the table so that they see, okay, this is my meal before me, and it helps them establish a healthy eating pattern rather than just having tons of food before them and wanting to gorge on it all. There's some other ideas that we can help families with, and there's some other resources that we can provide families with if when their child comes home, if this is a concern to them. The next case scenario says your child has been home for 8 months. One day, one of your biological children shares with you that your adopted child has touched them in a sexually inappropriate way. How do you react? What are your next steps in handling the situation? How do you process any anger towards your adopted child? Again, a primary reason for this question is to prepare the family. Prepare the family for the fact that anything is possible. When you are bringing a child into your home that has no known history, you don't know what kind of abuse or neglect they have received in their lives, nothing is off the table as far as what trauma may have happened to them in their past lives and how they might act out because of that trauma. And so we want to get families to start thinking about this. We would rather families be too cautious than not cautious enough. So this case scenario helps them to start thinking about that. We don't want to give them any irrational fears that this could happen, but we want to have them be prepared in case it would happen. Some of the red flags that you would look for in a parent's answer to this case scenario, again, would be them just negating the question and that it would never happen to them, or that they're not concerned about that, or that they aren't open to adopting a child that's been sexually abused. Because most of the children that have been sexually abused, it's not in their paperwork. Nobody knows there's been sexual abuse in their history until the child gets home and they start to exhibit behaviors that are symptoms of sexual abuse. So we would be concerned if a family just blew off the question and wasn't concerned about it and didn't think it applied to them. We want the family to think through this and think about how they feel they react, to have some self-assessment and self-awareness as to how they think they would react, and then how they would handle the situation. Again, we want them reaching out to people. We want them reaching out to their placement agency. If we're not the placement agency, we want them reaching out to us as their home study agency. We want the family to be very open and honest about how they would react and how they would handle their anger, so that we know that they're being realistic about this being a possibility, and we know that they're being realistic and thinking about how they would react. The next case scenario says your child has been home for 3 months. You have 2 biological children, and they are struggling with accepting their new sibling. They feel no love towards their new sibling, and no attachment has been made. They do not interact with one another, and if they do, it is with disdain. They get angry when their new sibling acts out or has negative behaviors. How would you feel about your biological children's rejection of the adopted child? How do you as the parent respond to your biological children? What habits and routines can you institute in your home to help assist the children with attachment? The truth is, we've been seeing this a lot with several of our families post-placement, where they bring home their adopted children and their biological children aren't attaching and aren't making a connection with the adopted child. And this weighs heavily on the adoptive parents, because at the point the child comes home, no, there's not necessarily an attachment there, and it takes work, but it's difficult for the adoptive parents to see this because they feel torn, and that they have this triangulation within their home of their adoptive child or children versus their biological children. So we want them, again, to be very self-aware that this is a possibility, that it could happen. We also want to ensure that the family is going to be able to give both the adoptive child and the biological children the time and the attention that they need in order to process through this, because it is a process. Attachment and bonding is a process. We talk with families sometimes about how this is a good opportunity to teach your biological children that love is a choice, it's not a feeling, and that loving their new siblings is a choice that they make. It's not necessarily a feeling that they feel, because there are going to be days where the adopted siblings do things that are annoying to them or do things that bother them, but we choose to love them anyway. some of the red flags that you would look for in this, the answer to this case scenario, would be, again, not being realistic about their expectations. If they seemed to be more dedicated towards helping their biological sibling than their adoptive sibling. We have seen some adoption dissolutions happen for this very cause, and that it was so hard on the biological siblings, that the adoptive parents decided to dissolve the adoption. So we want the family to go ahead and be able to explore this and explore how their feelings are when there's two different sides in their home, and they're having to help mend that and help fuse those two families. It's much like a blended family. If any of our families have experience with stepchildren and half siblings, it's very much like a blended family, and so it takes time and it takes adjustment. The final case scenario question says your child has been home for 3 months. You are struggling with attachment to your child. You do not feel the love and bond with your child that you anticipated during your adoption process. The excitement of adopting a child has disappeared. You want to feel attached to this child and are disappointed that it has not occurred. You oftentimes feel annoyed by the child, and sometimes even think maybe the adoption was a mistake. Who can you reach out to during this time? How do you discuss this with your spouse? What can you do to increase your attachment to your child? Are you committed to continuing with this placement even if you feel no bond with this child? The honest truth is that bonding and attaching with an adopted child is not like bonding and attaching with a biological child. It takes more work, and it takes intentionality in the things that you do. And so we didn't say necessarily what do you do if this happens. We say, who do you reach out to as support? Because it's likely that it might happen and it might be difficult. So we want the family to know ahead of time, this is normal. Who are you going to reach out to? Who are you going to talk to about this? Who's going to be your support people? How are you going to talk to your spouse about this? Especially if your spouse is not feeling the same way as you are. And then again, what can you do to increase that attachment with your child? And are you committed? We want the family to be committed to this child even if the attachment is difficult, because it might be. So those are the case scenario questions. So that is the end of the adoptive parent questionnaire that they're going to fill out on their own and give back to you. If you have questions about those case scenarios and aren't really sure how to read them and how to assess them, then you have your state supervisor to do that with you and to help you learn. But I have a feeling that that it's going to be a process of you getting used to these new case scenarios and knowing how to assess them and evaluate them. And it's going to take some time, but I really think it's going to help us in being able to assess these families better and ascertain what some of their difficulties might be down the road after the child comes home. So we'll go on to the next video and keep moving.